Roll for Crit is supported by our friends on Patreon. Come join the High Rollers at patreon.com/rollforcrit.
This is Roll for Crit, here with our review for the latest from Stonemaier Games, Red Rising. It's based on a series of books by Pierce Brown, a sci-fi dystopian setting in which everyone has been split up into different classes that are labeled by color, all the way from red at the bottom to gold at the top. Players in this game will represent various houses, and they will be competing to collect different character cards in order to maximize their victory and gain more power over their fellow players.
Indeed, your job in this game is not to overthrow the system, but to prove you are the strongest there. In order to make your house the best, you're going to have to get those very precious victory points. In order to get the most victory points for your house, you're going to be manipulating these characters in these 4 locations as well as the ones in your hand. Now you're going to start off with 5 character cards in your hand. You have 2 possible actions to take on your turn in order to manipulate these character cards. The first, and probably the most common one, is leading. To lead, you're first going to actually play a character card from your hand into one of the 4 locations. When you play a character card, it goes on top of the stack, and you will initiate its deployability. You'll see there in that symbol there, and they have many different cards. They're mostly unique for each card, so read and complete the action. After completing your deployability, you'll then have the option to take a character card back into your hand. When you take a card, simply take that front card and add it to your hand. Now, you will get a special ability depending where you take from, not the card. So in this case, because we took from Jupiter, we're going to do the Jupiter effect, which is simply moving up on the fleet track. Those will give you victory points at the end of the game. Now, the other locations have their own unique effects. Mars allows you to gain a helium, which each one will be worth 3 points at the end of the game. Luna allows you to gain the Sovereign token. This is a token that will not only be worth victory points at the end of the game, but every time you gain it or trigger this ability while you already have it, lets you trigger your house's unique power, which is pretty nice. Finally, we have the Institute, which allows you to add an influence token to the Institute. At the end of the game, you're going to look at who has the most tokens there, and the more tokens you have there, the more points you get. Let's say you don't like any of the cards you can pick. You can still take from the top of the deck. This way, no one sees it, and when you take from this, you get to roll this fun little die over here, and you get the result there. Most of them are the special effects we just went over, but there's some bonus ones, including adding an extra card to a location, not including a deploy effect, or just banishing a card, removing it from the game. If you do not wish to play a card from your hand nor gain a card in a location, you may choose to take the other main action, which is scouting. This is simply taking the top card of the deck and playing it in one of the locations, receiving that location's bonus.
Ultimately, you are trying to fulfill conditions on the bottoms of these cards in order to get points at the end of the game. Each card has a specific point value that it starts with as a base level in the top left corner, so they're all going to be worth that at least, but then at the bottom they can be worth even more if you complete those conditions. For instance, this data port specialist wants to be with a blue. That's a very common one. A lot of cards are going to want to be with or without specific colors. So I have a blue here. If I have this hand at the end of the game, then this guy is going to be worth an extra 26 points. Some of them want to be with specific named cards, so not just the color, but a specific card, which there may only be, and probably is, only one of those in the entire deck. Sometimes there will be multiple options, so you'll just have to try to satisfy that condition by finding that particular card. Some of them might, again, deal with your position on the board. More influence tokens you have, the more points you're going to get. You will also have some with special end of game abilities with this symbol that will allow you to get some last minute things and to try to get an advantage, like this one, which lets you treat this character as if it has the name of another character. So if you can't find the character that you needed for one of the other cards, you could maybe use something like that as a workaround. Instead of a deploy ability, some cards also have a block ability. These don't do anything when you play them, but if you keep them in your hand, you can use them to stop opponents from trying to harm you in some way, depending on what the card says, because there are a number of cards that will allow you to steal from someone or force them to banish a card or something else. The game will end once a few conditions have been met in a certain combination, either someone reaching 7 on the fleet track, having 7 tokens in the Institute, or gathering up 7 helium. And once someone or a combination of people have reached those conditions, you will finish out the round, and everybody gets to count up all their points from their hand and all these other things on the board that we mentioned previously. Once the game is over, they have some included score pads for you to calculate your total score from all the points you got from cards in your hand and all the other stuff that's going on the board that we talked about previously.
Now, as we stated in the beginning of this, and I think I'm curious on your thoughts on this, you actually have read the books. This is based on a book series. I have not. So, starting off, Jonathan, how do you feel as someone who's read the books and gotten to know at least a good chunk of these characters that it represents the series?
It is something that I have very mixed feelings on. As you can see, I think you get a sense just from understanding how the game plays. It does not go the route of really making this an extremely thematically immersive experience, in my opinion. If you read the books, and like we said, you're split up into different classes of different colors, and reading it, I think that lends itself very obviously to a potential board game. Everyone could be a different color. There's also a lot of space battles, and there's combat and all kinds of things that are the more obvious translations I think you could have made from this series, and they went a slightly more abstract direction. They do have a lot of really fun Easter eggs in there. If you do know the books, certain characters will want to be with or without each other, and you'll recognize, oh, I get why this person's doing that or that person's doing this. I'm not sure how it will translate to someone who isn't familiar with the source material, so that's you. So how did that come across to you?
Well, for me and someone who's actually used to properties that usually have a huge cast of characters, to me, I'm like, oh, look at all these cool people. And yes, there's also like the technician or someone who doesn't have a name, but that's still cool to see because, they exist in the world. And even though I don't know anything, you see someone like this person wants to find this other person, this person, like these 2 black cards want to be with this gold card. I'm like, okay, judging by how they interact, I'm guessing these 2 are bodyguards and that's the leader. And of course, even without knowing anything, just the names, it's very obvious this takes heavy Roman inspiration. So you're like, okay, that person's name's Nero. I think I can guess what that person's personality is.
Yeah, I don't think you're too far off the mark. It is a strange thing. The comparison I want to make is it's imagine if there had never been a Star Wars board game and this was a Star Wars game and all of the characters were named after Star Wars people, but like X-Wing battles were the fleet track. And the fleet track was just all your space battles was that. And all your lightsaber powers was like the Institute section in this game. And in this game, they really are just, there's things that are, you might be thinking about, but they're not the main focus. They're little side parts of the game. And each one of those in this could be zoomed in on and turned into its own in-depth game. Like that fleet track, there's an entire 4X game happening that they basically reduced to a track that you advance on, which is in some ways, I think for some people, if they don't know anything about this and they are excited about the space stuff from the books, I could see that kind of thing being a little disappointing. There's no political aspect. You're not forming alliances or anything like that. That being said, I don't want it to sound too much like I'm just ragging on the game. The theme, I find the implementation of it, like I said, I'm mixed about it. The game itself, I think, is pretty strong, and it's really very, very simple just to explain. Again, you basically play a card and pick up a card. That's pretty much all you're doing, but because every single card has a unique effect and a unique condition, there's hardly any overlap. Like, even if 2 things both like red cards, it's usually in a slightly different way, or they have an extra thing attached to it. There's so much going on that, like, first playing this game was a little bit overwhelming for me because it's like, I don't know which cards do what. There's a huge stack of all unique cards, and it is something that you get over that hurdle. But I like that because there's a lot of depth to it, even though it's pretty straightforward to play.
One thing we always enjoy in card games, and I think it's becoming a bit more common nowadays, is if they have 2 modes. For example, either like you can use this to play on the field or save it for energy or keywords. In this case, every card not only is unique, it's You can use it to play, or you can keep it for those end game goals. And that's really where a lot of the fun's going to be. It's deciding how much is it worth for me to keep this for its points, or am I using this because I really want the playability, and trying to build up. It's almost like an engine. Not exactly. It's sort of just like one-time victory points. Like, how can I collect the cards to get that perfect hand? Like, this card really doesn't want any golds, but this one gold is going to give me 20 points when the other one loses only 10 points for being with a gold. So I'm netting 10 points there.
The games, because there are so many cards, games can go a lot of different ways. The thing where you can banish cards, we had a game where that really barely came up at all. And we had another game where cards were getting banished left and right.
Oh, we were taking out people left or right. You know, it was Game of Thrones style then.
It was really gnarly, and this can go up to 6 players, which is a lot. And it's mostly focused on what you're doing and what you're thinking about. But especially as the player count increases, you do really have to pay attention to what other people are doing, because there are a fair number of cards that will not only allow you to hurt other players, but also say things like, if you're further on the fleet track than someone, you get this effect. So it is a little bit of a race, not in some ways, being like, oh, they're really moving on that fleet track, so I don't want to get left behind. Maybe I should focus on that, for instance.
Crits and misses for Red Rising.
Crits. This game is all about hand management, and fortunately, it handles that aspect very well, allowing players to build their hands and engines of sorts to gain more points in exciting and satisfying ways.
Throughout the game, you'll constantly be deciding whether to add or remove cards, slightly pruning and trying to make that perfect hand.
There are over 100 unique character cards included, each with their own special attributes and abilities, which means that no game you play is ever going to be the same twice, and there's potential for all kinds of different combos.
Whether you know this series or not, it'll be great to see this huge cast of characters, each with their own unique flair and great art.
There's just the right amount of player interaction here, allowing players to mess with each other and to compete for things on the board without it feeling like you're really struggling all the time to build your hand because other people won't stop obstructing your goals.
We didn't really come across too many cards that could ruin your entire day, but there's enough in there to maybe throw in some road bumps to your opponent so you can't just be playing your own game of solitaire. Misses. For those who are fans of the book series, you may feel a little bit wanting. You'll see the characters there, but not really the setting and going into the deep plot lines that the books provide.
If you're looking for immersive thematic battles or political intrigue, you won't really find it here, but at least there is a clear indication that the people who designed the game are familiar with the series and did it justice to the extent that it's included in the game.
Having a shared deck of unique cards can lead to some weird turns. Sometimes, even at the start of the game, you can just have a perfect hand, which means on your turn, you're either taking a risk to add a card that could help an opponent or playing it safe and just waiting for the game to end.
Depending on how many players there are and what the other players are doing, sometimes it can feel like the board or your hand are stagnant, there's not that much changing, and in those situations, the game can start to drag a little bit.
Now, Jonathan, I know you said this didn't live up completely to what you'd want from something after reading these books, but you read these books because we got the chance to review this game. And to me, even though I didn't read it, I still love seeing all these characters, and I'm excited for more book series that already haven't been made 5 times in movies like Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter to be introduced to the board game world. I think it's really cool to see titles like these being introduced, because even though I didn't read it, I still oh man, this character looks really cool, or I love the way this character interacts. I can definitely tell these two don't like each other. And for some of the, like I said, I have many properties where it's not just your cast of 4. They have a huge cast, usually to sell toys. But just being able to see them represented like this would have been at least I'm seeing them, so. And the gameplay itself is still fun. I still had a ball of a time just managing my hand and being like, yeah, yes, that gold, that's what I needed. Perfect. You go right here, and I'm going to play you now, and I'm going to get that extra influence. It just feels so good when you just get those extra little points and squeeze it out there.
Yeah, of course, I agree with you overall. It's awesome to see a series like this that's fresh to the board game scene. And I do like that A, they didn't take the obvious route, certainly with the design from the books. And B, it's not like as evidenced by you don't need to be a fan of this book series to play the game. You can enjoy it. It won't spoil anything for you. By that same token, though, part of me can't help but feel like, and it kind of hurts to say because I know that Jamie Stegmaier loves this series, and I know they worked really hard on translating the theme to the game. But from a marketing perspective, honestly, purely, and just attracting more players, I feel like if this were something more generic, if this were, say, Birds, for instance, like a Wingspan style game, this could have been like a mass market, very popular game. And I do think some people will be scared away when they look at it and see these like Pax O Telemanus and these strange Romanized names and sci-fi settings. And they might not want to approach this, whereas something more general could have been a broader game. And again, like it is a little weird to me how it does the theme really well in one regard, but at the same time doesn't delve into a lot of it. So I don't begrudge them, because I think it's a tough thing to translate because there are so many possibilities. So I like the direction that they took. I would also like to see more games that do those other things, I guess.
The thing is, because of as you brought up some of the names that were all based on old Roman names, I have a feeling that you probably could bring this to a table of, let's say, no one knows anything, like, yeah, this is a sci-fi game. Like, no different than bringing any other board game that isn't based on a strict, like, Star Wars property. And people be like,
yeah, well,
okay.
It worked for you, so I guess you're proof.
And it's very colorful, too, so it stands out from the rest. You know, it's not your normal tones. You know, for sci-fi, it'd be like grays and blacks, Apocalypse, brown. You know, you got a full color code, which will catch the eye. Now, we did play with the deluxe version. I want to point out here, I don't know what's different in the regular one.
Yeah, this was the collector's edition, which will not be for sale forever. So if you're watching this in the future, you might only have a version with different components. The rules are all the same. We just have fancy pieces and metal cubes and things like that. But everything else is going to be the same. I also don't know if the cards, we have the gold cards in our version are shiny and pretty, which is a nice touch. Red Rising is the game, whether you are a fan of the books or not. I think if you are a fan of the books, you will be happy picking this one up. And even if you aren't, it's worth taking a look at. It is a fun hand management game. It isn't anything, I don't think, in the realm of some of other Stonemaier titles like Scythe or Tapestry that feel really like big and ambitious. And this is like, oh man, this is the showstopper game.
Well, maybe this is the start. This is just to let everyone know what Red Rising is.
Right.
And we get our Scythe Red Rising.
It could be
space battles and political intrigue.
But I'm totally okay personally with, even though I lamented it a little bit, every game doesn't need to be a giant 4X game, you know? It's nice to have a smaller, more focused card game like this once in a while, and it does it very well. But you can talk to us in the comments if you've had the chance to play it, or if you're pre-ordering the regular collector's edition or what have you. And if you're a fan of the books or you aren't, what your thoughts on it are one way or the other from that perspective.
Let us know what house color you think you'd be part of, or are you just going to break the entire spectrum? After all, it is Red Rising.
Yeah, that's true. That's what it is. Talk to us in the comments down below. Thanks for watching. I'm Jonathan.
I'm Will.
And this was Roll for Crit. Like this video, subscribe to our channel, and support us on Patreon. That would make us happy.
Maybe the next video is the one where Jonathan does a silly dance.